destructive.
His name is Robert Paulson.
The first rule of Fight Club is you do not talk about Fight Club.
Robert Paulson.
Second rule of Fight Club is you do not talk about Fight Club.
Where'd you go, Sippable?
Welcome back to Cocktail Cinema, folks, your weekly movie review podcast. I am your first favorite bartender, your third favorite author, Josh Price, and as always, I am joined by my co-host, Greg, and our producer, Shasti.
Hello, hello.
Hey, Josh. Hello, everyone.
How we doing tonight, boys?
Good. Well, yeah.
Excellent. We are going to break rules 1 and 2 and talk about the 1999 cult film Fight Club.
The first rule of Fight Club is you do not talk about Fight Club.
This was directed by the great David Fincher of Seven fame, and it had a budget of $63 million and a box office return of $101.2 million.
Ooh.
So kind of a meager turnout at theaters,
right.
But it did have some explosive success on the VHS and DVD releases, which is kind of surprising considering there are some really big names attached to this movie, especially for 1999.
Right. I'll jump right in. Ed Norton's going to lend us our first role as the narrator, an embodiment of a narrator. Mm-hmm. Brad Pitt is up next as Tyler Durden. Helena Bonham Carter. Nice one. Meatloaf and his beautiful boobies as Robert Paulson, and Jared Leto as Angel Face. Rounds it out. Pretty much everything else is...
Yeah, everybody else is cursory. Yeah. It's solid cast, very solid cast, and Ed Norton, Brad Pitt at the top of their game. Helena Bonham Carter giving a great performance as always. The lovable Meatloaf, but
Bob.
The subject matter of this movie kind of puts a bad taste in my mouth sometimes, and I need to wash that bad boy down with something.
I see where we're going.
So let's talk cocktails. So tonight, I was thinking, I'm wearing my pretentious shirt. We're talking about a pretentious movie. Let's have ourselves a pretentious drink. So we have an amaretto old-fashioned in front of us.
I love a good old-fashioned.
So in order to build this drink, you're going to want a rocks glass with about half full of ice. You'll do 1.5 ounces of bourbon. Tonight we're working with Old Forester. 3/4 ounce of amaretto. 3 dashes of those cherry bitters we love so much. And a little bit of maraschino cherry syrup to kind of cut the bite there. And I've got an orange here for a garnish. Normally an old-fashioned would have a little bit of soda water added to kind of give it a little bubble.
Or like sugar cube.
Yeah, kind of cut it. But we wanted to be as sharp as possible. So we got a booze forward.
We got to be toxic males.
That's right. That's right. We're channeling our inner toxicity.
The napalm. Right?
Cheers,
Salud.
boys. So, even being booze forward like that, it's still very well rounded, and it doesn't really need anything else. So I've got an orange on the side. The boys have dropped theirs. You can do either. Most old fashions have it muddled, but we wanted to be visible.
There you go.
That said, let's talk about some stuff that gives you the heebie-jeebies.
Let's do it.
So, Fight Club. Very controversial even today. You could almost say especially today, considering like the Proud Boys movement that we've got is very much taking a page from Tyler's book.
Anarchist cookbook.
Yeah, just all sorts of craziness. But underneath all of that dressing, we've got David Fincher and his film style. What was the first thing that stood out to you watching this movie with a critical eye?
Lighting 100% jumps out. Doesn't jump out, I should say. It's very dark on the bottom half and bright on the top, and it's ever moving, ever changing. The geography of everything and how it's put together is very clear, very straightforward, and I don't know if they're trying to build a cage around you or trying to build a cage in his head, but we'll kind of
That's interesting.
get into that.
It's interesting. I know like the lighting was an absolutely intentional choice. Because there's something they did to the film in post-production called silvering, which is a process of treating the film so that the darker colors are a lot more rich. And so like Fincher did this in Seven a little bit to give those the blacks and the browns more depth.
Right.
Yeah.
But in this movie, he uses it across the entire flick, just because what it does is it almost gives your darker colors a little bit of swirl.
Yeah.
And it makes everything look kind of dirty and gritty.
You know what?
and
That
grimy.
makes sense because like when Tyler's in like that red leather jacket, it pops
It
like crazy. That
pops.
green one he's wearing earlier.
Well, Tyler's the only person that stands out in this
Yeah,
whole
right.
movie.
I mean, even Marla's pretty much drobed in black, and that's
well, there's only 3 people in this whole flick who have real names, and it's Marla, Bob, and Tyler. So all 3 of those characters pop in different ways, and Tyler is absolutely the most like in your face.
yeah, flamboyant, and
Yeah.
he's the leader. He's taking
Yeah.
over that brain.
Definitely. The twist in this is, don't worry, folks, we're adding those flies
having
in
a
post production.
Yep. And Chess and I are having Fight Club over here off camera.
We yeah. So this movie it brings a lot to the table. I mean, we're talking about domestic terrorism. We're talking about toxic masculinity. A little bit of almost neo-Nazi cultish mentality.
Yeah.
And just the deep abiding depression that people in our culture do experience on a regular basis. It's not just Gen X as it's suggested in this movie, but like everybody kind of feels this way at some point. And it's one of the things that drives so many people towards nihilism in their younger years. Is you've got all this what used to be angst in your high school days, and now is just like angry monotony.
Yeah.
And you want to break free from it.
Yeah.
And Tyler is the natural answer to all of that.
And we've talked on different movies that we've covered about giving one man so much power and how group mentality can be so detrimental to the group and society in itself, and it keeps growing. People are more stupid and keep buying the bullshit. And I guess the whole reason for Fight Club is to kind of let that primitive kind of state come out and let yourself be the man or the woman that you would expect from yourself in a larger role. People that are kind of taking the backseat to a lot of this stuff are now being able to be that person that they wanted.
It really puts on display, and you don't realize it on the first watch, because the first time you watch this movie, you assume that they're blaming their mothers for the way they are. We're a generation of men raised by women. But in reality, we're talking about the failure of men to teach boys how to be members of society. So you've got the narrator who assumes so many different personalities when he's going to these therapy sessions or these group therapy sessions, just so that he can feel like he's a part of something. And he talks about how his father left him and abandoned him. Well, that man never taught him how to integrate himself into society.
Right.
So he's got this gaping hole that he doesn't know how to fill. And the only thing that fills it is this need for pain and the need to inflict pain.
And there's call-outs later in the movie that suggest that as well, like how he was abused, this, that, and the other, that go to link up his, multiple personality syndrome. It's a wild ride, you know what I mean? Personally, I thought Marla was kind of in the same head there for a little while. I know that's some
Wait. You like Marla? You think Marla's
another
like
part,
a figment of his imagination?
no, like another personality. Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly. I mean, I was leading that way for a while. I know that a lot of the fan theories and stuff we've talked about before suggested that as well. But I'm one of those people that don't like to watch trailers before the movies. I've seen this movie a million times before this, but I really watched it closely this time. And I think like the lighting that was used suggested that there was more than just Tyler and the narrator in this head.
It's possible.
And then
Possible.
just the scene exchange where she's walking out and Tyler's coming in. Even the stairs were uneven. So like we talked about a little bit, like the Penrose situation. So it was like this never-ending battle of mind versus mind.
They were never, and he even calls it out. Like Marla and Tyler were never in the same room with me.
He's like, my parents used to pull the same stunt.
Yeah.
Which also kind of pushes that theory to where she's in his head.
Which it's interesting because the story that the narrator tells about his father when they're in the bathroom is, my dad left when we were 6. But then Tyler tells a story of, I went to high school. My dad said I need to go to college. I went to college. My dad said I need to get a job. I think Tyler's story, given what little clues we get, like that scene with Marla, about the narrator's parents, I think the narrator's lying that his dad left.
Yeah, I mean,
I think his dad just mentally checked out.
The whole reason for Tyler is that he's the protector. I mean, normally on that kind of situation where somebody's battling abuse and they take on these different personalities, the first one is going to be either the protector
Aggressive.
or the sensitive one, so they can put all of their crap into one corner. And Tyler he's a protector.
Well, and when you are especially a child of abuse or neglect, you manufacture these ideas of strength and manhood on your own, and they're mostly influenced by the extremes you see in books and film, which are intended to be archetypes of characters rather than examples for how to live your life. Right. So when you've got a kid like the narrator who builds his whole identity, or that builds the identity of Tyler around guys like John McClane and James Bond, you get this V from Vendetta without the ultimate realization that anarchy is a nightmare at the end. Like Tyler never realizes that anarchy's bad. He's a lost cause.
On it.
That persona is a lost cause, and you've got to grow out of it.
I mean, taking the fat from women and their liposuction and putting it into soap and feeding their fat right back to them, is the most hilarious thing that you can ask for out of this film. You know? Just like you were talking about how nothing's really off topic for this director, and he kind of will make you a little squeamish, and that's disgusting.
It's gross. And it's not like they just talk
it's like a
about
funny
it
part. It's like almost comic relief at this point to this movie. But
spilling the bag.
So gross.
Having the foresight though to bring a rug with them to put over the razor wire. Like this was the first time I noticed that. I'm like, oh damn, they thought about this.
Definitely
Or
premeditated.
he thought about it.
Yep.
Although it does put that moment into question. Like, so he was just throwing bags to his imaginary friend over the fence. Oh lordy. So I know this conversation feels a little disjointed, but there's a reason for that. This whole story is disjointed. You are more off kilter as an audience member than the narrator is. The narrator never has a clue what's going on. Like Edward Norton is lost, and that's the whole point of his character. He has no arc. Like even at the very end, his solution is to shoot himself to try and kill Tyler. So he has no arc with any sort of growth or solution other than we're going to avoid the Nazi phrase and just say an ultimate solution.
Ultimate.
So I think part of that comes from what I like to call frat boy nihilism. And Tyler's, I'm going to go on a tirade here. Tyler's whole character is built around this idea of misunderstanding Nietzsche. So Nietzsche is the I believe he was Russian, but I could be wrong, or German, but he was the guy who kind of introduced the world to the concept of nihilism. And most people, when they just give a cursory read to his works, they assume that when Nietzsche talks about nothing mattering and there being no cosmic purpose, that's where it ends. So you've got all these fucking frat boys running around being like, you don't matter, no lives matter, nothing I do matters, so I can be a complete dick to you whenever I want because none of this has any meaning. And it's used as an excuse, and when taken to its extreme, it becomes this kind of domestic terrorism. Whereas if you take Nietzsche to his ultimate conclusion, he says, God is dead and we have killed him, but you forget that he also talks about we have become God. So we've removed the religious purpose from our lives. And the whole point of nihilism is that we now have the freedom and the power to give every moment purpose. And that is Tyler's biggest failing, is he doesn't give things purpose. He wants to ruin whatever purpose anybody gives to their lives by introducing chaos to every moment. And it drives me nuts because I know people like this.
Well, he's feeding on the weak. He's letting them think that they have a purpose when he's taking it from them.
Well, he's not a true anarchist. He's a fascist because your way of living is wrong always, and it doesn't matter. Right. And you shouldn't listen to authority unless it's Tyler.
Right.
So he really is a fascist dictator all the way through this flick. Like he's a cult. He's Jonestown mixed with Hitler.
Don't drink the Kool-Aid.
Right. He's the worst. He's the worst. And I think the majority of people who read the book or watch this movie, they assume that's the message you're supposed to get out of it, and that's why you have such pent-up aggressive boys latching on to this story. It's like, oh, we're going to start a fight club.
Right.
We're going to get our aggressions out. We're going to fight society. It's like, no. Remake society in your image.
Absolutely.
Like, go out and make changes. Don't just go out and... Because even in the book, Tyler is a murderous fuckhead. In the movie, they try to soften him up a little bit and make him
In the
sympathetic.
movie, he's
but-
cool. He's cooler than Fonzie. He's got the good gear. He talks smooth. He's always got an answer for everything. And they do glamorize him for sure in this movie.
Absolutely.
But
And
you're not
it's
wrong.
I'm going to pull this back to filmmaking, because you could make the argument that this is a character study, but really Tyler's just a vehicle for this concept to be discussed. Like how we talk about how some horror movies talk about racism or nationalism using these fantastic images and these scary images. This movie takes one person and it just codifies everything about neo-nationalism and extremism into a single person, and they're like, this is what the ultimate conclusion of this is. Let's talk about that. But it's rare when you hear people talking about Fight Club in that way. It's usually aggressive, like, fuck yeah, we're going to use this to amp up kind of conversation.
I mean, you use these big words like nationalism and you bring up Nazi tendencies and stuff, but it meant we're still dealing with one mind here. You know what I mean? So he's painting this picture of this huge state, and he's changing everything. He's changing one person. You know what I mean? And this one person is able to do well. Even if maybe the narrator is Tyler. I mean, there's so many questions to be asked in this movie. You have to watch it over and over again to kind of even try to get a feel for it. You know, so it's just tough to go on to think about those broad span of topics that you're talking about, and then come back to realize we're talking about one guy's fucked up head.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
which is, it's tough. You know, and
It is.
It's an interesting
And
way to look at it,
The mental health issue here is another thing that's not discussed, but
which can be as scary as the monsters we talked about. Before,
absolutely,
you know?
absolutely, because you don't like both Tyler and the narrator are unreliable narrators. So I am inclined to think that Tyler is actually the real personality, the original personality of the narrator, and Jack or Sebastian or whatever Bob calls him, Cornelius is the what he puts forward to go out in society.
Or
I think
Marla.
Tyler's the real person.
Yeah.
But
There's ways to think about it. I got up for interpretation across the whole board. I went through the whole gamut last night. Yes, I was a little intoxicated. Had a few too many of these old fashions, I suppose. But God, these flies. But no, I mean, I thought about literally every aspect of this movie, every aspect of what it could be. There was even a point where I thought all of his Fight Club members were all his personalities. For him to have like national outreach and stuff like that, really kind of. And then they had the burn.
The burn in this on the same
so
hand.
I mean, part of me thought that was all the same person as well. You know,
Yeah,
I mean,
it's definitely an interpretation, and it's an interesting storytelling technique.
It is, yeah.
To have that be somewhat open ended. Like there's some people that are definitely not Tyler, but you were talking
You
about
gotta
Marla
ask.
earlier.
Yeah.
You can question it up until I think the last scene, and it really is a mind bender. 22 years here now after its release. There's a reason we're still talking about it, and a lot of that comes down to David Fincher, number one, knowing how to adapt the story, and number two, being just a phenomenal filmmaker.
Yeah.
Like I will not watch this movie again for a long time because it messed with me,
right.
but it's still worth watching.
Yeah. The only thing that the ending. I mean, I used to be okay with the ending. The ending to me now does not make sense whatsoever. The big cascading building. I think that was all bullshit too. I think that's all mind treatment. The way that he's able to shoot himself in the mouth, comes out the side, and he's still getting up talking to people. That's another reason why I think that you're right with Tyler Durden being number one, because he's just walking around with his face blown off, like talking to people, like, hey, sorry about everything, So it's the ending seemed rushed and a little bit out of place, but I guess the movie was out of place and it's kind of meant to be that way. But I don't know. I didn't like the ending as much as I did in the past. I really thought it was out of place. And
We've discussed a lot of auteur directors, and Fincher can definitely fall in that category. But he's a little more if Christopher Nolan is John Williams, if we're going to compare him to composers, John Williams, then David Fincher is John Cage. He's just everything plays a part. The chaos, the silence plays a part. Right. Whereas where Nolan would make sure that every moment ties into the next moment, and it's very meticulous. Fincher, he leaves a lot of threads unpulled and untied, so that you have to discuss it.
I have a question that's been bothering me the whole time. The house. What is that? Because he talks about that there's nobody in 30 miles or whatever radius. All of a sudden he's got all these. He's got an apartment here, an apartment there, and then there's this giant wooden house that's dilapidated, and people are in and out, and nobody knows who's there. It's only them. They have people standing on the porch. It's like, is that house the brain? You know what I mean? It's
you could make that argument that it's symbolically like the.
It just
the
seemed
whole brain.
weird that all this was going on. People are standing out of their door. They have basically a
compound.
Yeah, compound.
In a
building explosives.
Industrial.
I mean, it's just that seemed a little bit weary as well. Usually when there's something like that, it's kind of, again, it's up to your interpretation, but that was just wonky to me too. I mean, he's got like 3 or 4 different places. Shasty and I talked about this too.
He's got 2.
The apartment.
He's got the apartment where he blows up, and then he's got
Greg
the
was
house.
saying if he's Marla too.
He's got 2 apartments.
Yeah, right.
That's true. But yeah, it really comes down to those 2 or 3 places, depending on how you feel about Marla.
Yeah.
But that also displays the dichotomy between the 2 personalities, because the apartment that gets blown up, he's blowing up his whole world. He's blowing up his whole life.
Right.
And everything is in its place. Everything is the way it should be. He almost had everything he wanted.
After he bought all that,
But he realized he didn't want it.
Yeah.
So he just destroyed it all. And the house is disheveled. It's falling apart. Just like his life is falling apart. His brain is falling apart. The house is nothing more than an allegory for his mental state. Because even though it gets fortified, it's still falling apart.
Right. Yeah. Every part of that. Okay. All right. I just wanted to ask that question to you because the house had me mind boggled for a little bit. You know.
It's a fair question, because there are a lot of stories where the house is like a living character.
Yeah. Right.
Like it's gonna be weird, but the Japanese movie Houseu is about
Monster
a monster house. Yeah. So totally fair, and Fincher knows setting. You know, he moves from set to set intentionally.
And he was able to do, like we talked about before, with the geometry and stuff. And it's got the stained glass windows. Everything's made of wood, so it's very vertical. You know, it just that created more space. You know, I don't know. It kind of tightened and shrunk everything that he was doing with his camera work and the lighting and the geometry. It just seemed to be breathing. The movie was taking breaths.
Yeah, absolutely. And as someone who does deal with mental health issues, it was probably one of the most accurate depictions to how you feel when you're in that, like I call them cycles. When I'm in a depressive cycle, everything is just disjointed and crumbling and falling apart and confusing, and it feels utterly and cosmically chaotic. So watching this movie again really threw me for a loop, because I had never thought about it that way before. But Fincher captures, possibly accidentally, what it's like to be bipolar. Even though he was talking about dissociative identity disorder.
They're all hand in hand.
They're all cousins,
Yeah.
But it was I watching this. It's like, holy shit, this is what my brain feels like. Like I'm kind of cycling right now, so I feel chaotic, and I feel like
At least he was giving
things
Jared
are-
Leto to beat
You're
the
right.
shit out of.
I don't want to beat up Jared Leto. He's got a chance to play the Joker again.
Well.
It's wild. So I have a question for you now that comes to mind.
Yeah.
So, given how I felt about how the movie related to my mental state, as someone who maybe isn't in that same boat, how did it speak to you? How did the chaos of the story speak
Well,
to
you
you?
talked about cycles, and I think we all deal with it at some point or another. I don't care if you're the most sane person in the world, you've felt these things before, you know? How it spoke to me was just, I think it was kind of a wake-up call, just to kind of, to realize, to know that there is that type of person out there, type of people that are trying to make this stuff happen. I mean, we've seen it. I mean, the acts of terror happen all the time. And
Yeah.
you know, they're quiet here, and then they're just there in front of everybody. It's just like kind of the mental psyche too. You get to a point where you explode. I know what's going on around me, and I tell my son too. He's young. I mean, he asked about monster stuff. I said, "There's monsters out there, but they're not what you think they are. They look like me and you. I need to be careful." And I think that's a point to be taken from this movie as well. Given that, I think Ed Norton and Brad Pitt were the perfect options for this movie to play these people. And Marla, I think it was perfectly casted. Ed Norton's one of my all-time favorites. But yeah, just taking that from, I think the actors were given enough space to be themselves, and the director gave them the necessary tools to do so. But,
Absolutely.
But I thought it brought mental illness into light to me. And yes, it was somewhat comical and grotesque and this, that, and the other, but it's
definitely
there,
over the
man.
top.
You know?
Yeah, that's interesting. Because like you and I have talked off mic about real world applications, but this is the first time it's come up in film, kind of like this.
Right.
So it was an interesting kind of microscoping of that topic. But I've kind of worked through my notes. Is there anything else that stuck out to you before we start talking tacos?
No, I think we're good. I mean, a lot of people have seen this movie, so they know the deal. I mean, like we've kind of gone away from telling the whole story and just letting the people who've seen the movies come with us on our review. So I'm good.
Mikey, anything that stood out to you?
Yeah. I mean, I think mental illness aside, you know what I mean? Before you even see that the narrator has a split personality, he's just dealing with everyday problems that people can deal with. Just where when Tyler even says to him, "Don't let the things you own end up owning you."
Yeah.
When he's saying he's talking about himself.
Right.
He's telling him that I'm gonna end up owning you. But but it's the whole his obsession with furniture, his yin yang table that he's ordering from IKEA,
Yeah, I forgot when it's
all the
outside.
stuff that when Tyler blew up his apartment, that he was devastated over losing.
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like that's the obvious thing you get, and watching it, for the 30th time, you're trying to see who else is a figment of the narrator's imagination, or taking a step away from that. But there's still that everyday kind of dilemma that people have, and just with being self-consumed. You know what I mean?
Just going to a fucking job you hate.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's enough to do it to
Yeah.
you. You know,
It's
The insomnia. You know what I mean? It's
doesn't take much sometimes. Just one little thing can trigger a whole downslide.
well, I referenced Nolan earlier, and like the Nolan's Joker. One bad day can do it to somebody, and that's kind of what you see. I mean, all that aside, I mean, this was a rather heavy episode, but it's a heavy movie. There were some filmmaking tricks, like you see Tyler Durden 6 times before he's introduced, and I think
Those little flashes,
three of
burns.
them are single frames of him spliced into the movie, and then the other times he's in the picture of he's in the commercial
sneak one in,
of the he's in the commercial with the waiters, and he's all the way to the right, kind of hidden. He walks by in the background, I think at the airport, and then there's one other that I'm forgetting.
Okay.
But they prime you mentally to
in
see
the
Brad
support
Pitt.
group, and then outside
Yeah,
the support
yeah,
group,
yeah.
when he's watching Marla walk away, and like the camera focuses back to narrator, and your eyes. This is the first time I saw this one, but your eyes are always going to go back to Edward Norton,
Where it focuses, yeah.
and then he pops up where Marla's character is out of focus.
Yeah. So that was a cool little nod to both the themes of the movie and the introduction of Tyler, and then some of the more just random things that came out of the book, like the splicing of films and putting a single frame of pornography into a kid's movie, just so that
Operating in broad daylight.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And I will point out, if you're watching this movie, don't look for them because they're there. I looked for them and
Very
I found
large.
them. I found them and I am traumatized. It was the worst. I think it's the very last frame of the movie is not pretty. And I watched this movie right before I went to work, so it ruined my whole day. Ruined my whole day. But that said, we here at Sippable Opinions, we like to rate our movies out of a taco rating rather than a tomato rating. So out of 100 tacos, Grego, what do you give Fight Club?
You know, before I watched it critically, I would have put this movie around an 89 or so. It's dropping off a few points for me. A few things that I didn't like there as far as the ending goes. Still a must-watch movie. I'm going 87 with this one.
Excellent. Shasti?
I'll give it. I'm gonna give Fight Club an 84. I feel like first time I saw it, I probably would have rated it the same. Yeah, love the movie. It's great.
I think we're all kind of in agreement because I think before this watch through, I probably would have put it, possibly even above 90. I know when I first watched it, I thought it was one of the best films ever made. But watching it critically and really soaking in the messages that are in this flick, I have to give it an 86. It's a must-watch, but I don't really recommend it. It's a very painful movie to watch.
It's a slippery slope.
It's a very rough movie to watch, and it can mess you up emotionally. But it's still Fincher did a great job with it. So we got an 87, an 84, and an 86. We got an average of 85 and a half.
85 and a half,
yeah. What's the Rotten Tomatoes?
It's pretty close.
No kidding. I believe it.
Pretty close.
I believe it.
It's an audience score right there.
So we got an audience score of 96
And then it's a bunch of
critic
people who
score
saw
of
it
79.
I think this is
times
pretty
and
much
started-
exactly what we're talking about. Like
Yeah.
96 when we watched it the first time, back down to like 79, and we're trying to call it in the middle. So yeah, I agree with
Well, and I
that
mean,
score.
think about who really loves this movie. If they're gonna like people that really like this movie, they're giving it 100 every time.
Yeah.
Whereas the critics, like us, are forced to watch it this way, kind of seeing it for what it is.
The critics with a refined palate.
That said, wherever you're listening to or watching this, drop us a comment and let us know how you score this movie.
Right.
How do you score Fight Club? What do you think about it? We'd love to hear what you've got to say.
Love it.
If you're watching this on YouTube, go ahead and hit that like button, hit the subscribe button if you haven't already, and the bell notification button so that you can be notified every time we drop a new project or new video. We do another podcast called the Fozcast, where Grego here interviews uniquely qualified guests.
We have a lot of fun.
Yeah,
some
got
of them
good
are a
stuff
little bit
coming
lighter
down.
than others, but it's always a great pleasure to have my guests on and to share their stories. So stay tuned.
Yeah, we're hoping to do some cross promotion with some of those upcoming guests here real soon. So keep your eyes and ears peeled for that. If you would like to support us on Patreon for as little as $1 a month, you can get exclusive access to everything on our Patreon, which includes early access to all of our episodes, an exclusive show we call The Sip, where usually we talk about a little bit of history and just apply it to our daily lives, but it's our Suburbanite Insight podcast. How is life affected here in the suburbs? And exclusive access to pilots to our shows that you cannot get anywhere else. You'll have full access to our entire library. It's definitely worth checking out. That said, Greg, Shasti, thank you for being here with me.
Thank you, Josh.
I love our recording nights.
Amen.
And to the audience, we love spending this time with you. We do it all for you. We appreciate you taking the time to be with us. And for this week, we just gotta say goodbye. Don't talk about Fight Club.
Things you own end up owning you.